yeah, I think that brings us to the next point, Rich, which is tying this all in here, as Macklem talked about today, boring Macklem, um, is commodity inflation. We've got, oil, even in Western Canadian Select here is over $100 a barrel, playing into more inflation, right? As we've talked about before, oil is life. It's basically in every aspect of our lives today. So that higher input cost is going to trickle through. So, and then we've got Ukraine and Russia, which are huge, wheat and grain suppliers. What are they? I don't know what Ukraine is. Was it 30-40% of wheat supply? I don't know. Rich, you'll know better. I'll turn this to you. But how do you see this sort of playing out in markets and in general? Right? The biggest thing I'm looking at is like, oh my gosh, like, if you think food inflation's been bad over the last 12, 18 months, I'm like, this could get really nasty. And I think
Yes.
that's when you get that social unrest, right? I mean, like, hey, it's all fine and dandy, a little bit of inflation here, but when people start saying, hey, I can't put food on my table, I think that's when people get really upset.
Yeah, so I think what's important to, I think, so one of the things I object to is central bankers using what's going on in Ukraine and relating that to inflation that we're seeing. Because remember, what is inflation? Inflation is some kind of price index, whether it's a producer price index or a consumer price index, and it's the change. So the year-on-year change, or 3 month on 3 month, or whatever it is, but it's the change over a time frame that's in the past. Yeah. So the fact that oil's gone up $10 or 10% over the last, 2 weeks or whatever, it does not, I mean, that's the idea that they would blame current inflation on what's happened in the last 2 weeks. That's just bogus. So let's just keep it. I think it's important that we understand sort of the definitions of what we're talking about. As far as commodity prices, I think what's really fascinating is before this kicked off in Ukraine, before the invasion of Ukraine, non-energy commodity prices. So what is that? That's everything from gold to pork bellies to cattle and milk and everything in between. That had already reached sort of the all-time high. And the all-time high, according to the Goldman Sachs Standard & Poor's Commodities Index, was April 2011. If you look at grain, so there's different ways. Obviously, that's made up of a bunch of different indices for commodities. Obviously, I excluded energy because energy is just sort of its own market and it's its own sort of animal. But what is non-energy commodity prices? That includes agriculture, industrial metals, precious metals, ferrous metals. It also includes, we mentioned agriculture, but important in that agriculture index is obviously grain. And that's where things like wheat obviously really matter. And your point about social unrest, if you'll recall that April 2011, it's sort of not an accident, or maybe it is a coincidence, but that the, what was it called? The Arab Spring happened in and around the summer of 2011. And, who can blame them, right? I mean, these countries, so the poorer you are in general, the more and more you spend on food relative to your overall relative to your disposable income, the more and more you spend on food. And the grain, in some way, shape, or form, is the most important food stuff in the world for everybody, whether you're Chinese, whether you're African, whether you're Canadian, whether it doesn't matter. You're spending the vast majority is either grain or a derivative of grain. So if you're buying beef, lots of animals will eat corn, or, not everybody is rich like Steve. They can eat grass-fed Kobe beef, but for the rest of us, we're eating USDA meat, and it's almost all of that is corn fed. And so that's why people are, and then we didn't even talk about the fertilizer point, which is also used in growing, obviously, all of these foodstuffs. And so, if I'm looking at the grain index right now, which and we're back to basically just a sniff below all-time highs again, 2011. And I think the really important thing I think we're all sort of forgetting is, and why I think it's going to continue to ratchet higher, is two reasons. One is inventories were already quite low for various different reasons. There was a really bad harvest in Brazil, I believe. I think a lot of key, what's it called? Storage facility. There was a storage facility you mentioned.
Dry. Yeah. Sorry, just to quickly chime
No,
in
no.
here. Nations. So in Canada, 40% of Western Canada's grain output was basically wiped out due to dry conditions essentially last year. So yeah, basically
Yeah.
it says here stockpiles of wheat in Canada dwindled to 15.6 million tons at the end of December, down 38% from a year earlier.
Yeah. So it relates to the oil sector in a sense because you had and obviously the shutdowns and the lockdowns, they affected it. There was shit weather over the last little while. It's sort of just like it's like a perfect storm. But I also think what's also really important, especially this is true for the basic materials sector. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, but lithium prices are through the absolute roof. Partly this is because of the lockdowns, but it's also partly because, and I mentioned this in my oil rant from a couple of weeks ago, it's a function of the CapEx spending. So what's CapEx? CapEx is capital expenditure for mining and metals companies. And that's at a relative to sales, relative to assets, relative to any way you want to sort of measure it over time. The CapEx spent on resource extraction is basically at 20-year lows. And why is this true? Because of a lot of green energy policies. I'll skip that rant for now. But the point is regardless of why it's happened, it is happened. So you got short-term inventories are low. The long-term, medium-term prospect for improving those inventories are also low. And then obviously demand is coming back online. And so you've just sort of got this sort of perfect storm. And I think that absolutely think commodities are going to, and then obviously you've got the Russia-China thing. Russia is a huge producer of commodities, especially for the West. And yeah, so I think we're over the next little while, I think we're definitely going to see some higher commodity prices. I don't know if it'll be sustained. I mean, humans know how to grow and accumulate grain. So
just to quickly touch on this before I get to Keith's comments here, but so CP Rail here in Canada is actually potentially voting to go on strike as of March 16th, which could further disrupt deliveries of key fertilizer for farmers, just as they're trying to sort of play catch up here. Canada, along with Russia and Belarus, are one of the main sources for the world's potash, which is commonly used in fertilizer. So, turning into a bit of a shit show. Like I said, I think if you want to get you might want to get long some food, get long a Costco membership, because I think it's going to get more expensive to put food on the table here moving forward. Keith, any sort of comments and maybe how you see this shaping up into financial markets as well? Like, obviously we see the dollar wrecking ball is certainly part of your bull thesis, and that seems to be playing out as well.
Again, I think, from a financial market perspective and the economic perspective, this is just incredibly fascinating. So I've gone through a number of these over the years. But just back to Rich's point with food and specifically wheat. So, we have exposure directly to agricultural commodities. So three main ones are wheat, corn, and soy. Those are the three main ones. But to give you an idea, like over the last year prior to the Ukraine-Russia war, the price of wheat went from roughly $650 up to $800. So what's that, like a 20% increase, I guess, something like that? And that is reflecting tighter supplies, less yield on the crops that are out there, fertilizer was becoming more expensive, all that. And then all of a sudden, the war started. So now the current contract for wheat down in Chicago, it's gone from $800 up to $1,200. So that's a 50%, that's a 100% increase in wheat over the last couple of weeks. And so what we like to look at from an investment perspective is whenever I see any market go vertical, up or down, that's exciting. That's exciting because the world is not linear. Nothing ever stays in the current trend forever. Something will turn here. If this war, if there's a resolution to it at some point soon, and I think there will be, because alternatively it means it gets really bad, and then we're moved to a completely different phase of it. And the way mainstream media is right now, that's what they're telling everyone. Like there's never a horizon, right? It's a dark tunnel and that's it. And I don't think that's the case. There will be a resolution of some sort coming up here. So in that space, you would, as soon as the war is over, or there's a resolution and everyone, wins a little bit from it, because that's the way they have to do it. For example, Russia cannot lose this and not save any face in anything. Like it just doesn't work that way at that stage. The Russians have to get some kind of consolation prize. So people that think, Putin's going to get dragged through the streets and all that, if it happens, it's going to create even a bigger vacuum in the world of what happens next. Because right now we have one world power, that's it. People think China and the Russians are combined or close to, but it's not. But you don't want one extreme power in the world, and that's what it is right now. So we have that taking place. But let's jump over right now